That caught your attention, didn't it? Sirens and flashing lights are patterns expressly designed to make it very, very difficult for those parts of the brain that process sight and sound to ignore. And I added something else. And that was the unexpected. At least I hope you weren't expecting sirens and flashing lights just because I walked on stage. And that makes it pretty obvious to see why the brain pays attention to that kind of signal, to that kind of input, and especially to the unexpected. When you have a shadow where one shouldn't be, a sudden sound, a breath of air on the back of your neck, your name, Dan, coming up from a bubble of noise, it could mean danger or opportunity. And at this point, you're probably thinking, why is she asking us to pay attention to attention? And that's because there's nearly 50 years of working with individuals and organizations to help them change, develop, learn, do what they want to do. Attention is simply the most important factor I've come across. And of course, it's not attention by itself. It's attention together with practice and with passion. And the practice is not mechanistic practice. It's intense, deep, dedicated, hard-working, try, fail, try again, improve, do it again, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, do it again, that kind of practice. And in order to do that, you need the kind of motivation that comes out of passion. Up until about the middle of the last century, scientists believed that the adult brain wasn't plastic. It didn't change very much. Of course, it changed a bit, but the big changes happened in infancy, from the womb to about 3 years old, and in adolescence, up until about the end of the teen years. And after that, well, it was a bit of a plateau, or all down there from here, all downhill. I'm very glad to be able to tell you today that that is simply not true. The adult brain changes significantly with every input that comes in. The point is how to change it in a direction you want to go in, and sustainably and significantly. How do you change a bad habit? How do you acquire a good one? How do you become better at a particular skill? And how does all that work? Well, it's our emotions on a spectrum from fear to trust and love that act as labeling machines. They say, this is good, this is bad, and, oh, hang on a moment, that potentiator, the alt bit. And it is that attention, whether it's bottom-up, coming in from outside the environment or our inner environment, our body, or top-down, coming from where we put it, that is how we direct our attention. And of course, fear attracts attention more than anything else. And again, obviously, because you want to get away, you want to survive. But the other labels attract attention too. And Darwin said, hardly any faculty is more important to the intellectual progress of man than attention, as when a cat crouches by a hole waiting to spring on its prey. Some people say attention is like a conductor, orchestrating a number of neural networks to fire at a level and an intensity that takes an input from the subconscious to the conscious and enables the brain to work on it. Well, that has an implication. And the implication is that attention appears to be the mechanism through which the brain focuses its resources. Now, that is the most important thing I'm going to say to you today, so I'll say it again. Attention is the mechanism through which The brain focuses resources on something. And that means if you can direct your attention, you are directing where your brain puts its greatest resources. How good is that? And why should that matter? It matters because the brain is highly resource intensive, and as a result, it's a very competitive environment. Different parts of the brain compete for processing power in order to do things. And the resources aren't infinite. So that processing power, to be able to direct it, is absolutely phenomenal. That power of attention was first discovered by the great Michael Mesenic in his lab doing some experiments with owl monkeys. They looked at the brain of owl monkeys before and after the experiment, where they were tapping a lever with one finger for a reward of a fruit pellet. And after that experiment, that part of the brain that controlled the finger had literally acquired more territory, more neurons were devoted to finger pressing. But the interesting bit comes when they change the experiment, and instead of the reward coming as a result of the finger pressing on the lever, it came as a result of a sound coming through earphones. And guess what? It wasn't the part of the brain that controlled the finger, it was a part of the brain that controlled hearing that grew. And there's another example much closer to home. There are no windows in this room, but if there were, you could look out and see plenty of London black cabs. And the brains of London black cab drivers have a greater right posterior hippocampus. And that was published by Eleanor Maguire and her team from UCL in 2006 to great acclaim. But there were some questions, like, is it because they're cab drivers that the right posterior hippocampus is bigger? Or is it that people with that kind of configuration in the brain choose that kind of career? So they looked at bus drivers' brains, and they found the same differential. Black cab drivers' brains were significantly larger in that part. And then they did something else. They looked at London black cab drivers' brains after retirement. And the right posterior hippocampus had begun to shrink already 3 months later. Use it or lose it, literally. What happens, in addition to territorial expansion, is that communication between neurons increases in efficiency. There's simply more neurotransmitters, the more certain neurons communicate between themselves and the brain and the body in patterns on a regular basis. So the more you practice, the easier that communication becomes, the more regular it becomes, the more reliable it becomes. And not just more neurotransmitters, increased sensitivity in the reception. And that's not all. More synapses are created because more dendrites grow along an axon when neurons communicate regularly, when they fire regularly together in response to the same signal. That's called learning. And even that's not all. Regular firing of a neuron causes the axon to be wrapped round more thickly by the myelin sheath, which acts as the black rubber coating on the old copper wire. It protects the signal from leakage, and it sends it down the axon more quickly. So you have increased territorial growth, increased synaptic efficiency, speed, and regularity, and that underlies just the most fantastic things. Creativity, as we were hearing, learning, development, change, skill acquisition, the ability to swim like a fish and win an Olympic gold medal, the ability to lose a bad habit by disciplining yourself to practice not going to the fridge immediately on coming home from work. The ability to be an expert driver, not necessarily a Formula One driver, but the kind of driver that is so good and so expert and so knowledgeable that by the time you've got home from work, you can't remember how you got there. And that helps the brain conserve energy. Of course, you cannot really be Michael Phelps unless you're shaped like Michael Phelps. But you can be a gold medal winner, world champion, and Olympian, starting rowing at 18, and having the passion to practice and improve and get there, in spite of holding down a full-time job, like my son did, who's here today, for which I'm very grateful. And both that top-down and bottom-up attention is what changes our brain. But it's the top-down stuff, it's the stuff you direct that will change your brain in order to achieve the results you want. And you've heard the 10,000-hour rule. Yeah, you have to practice for 10,000 hours. But after this, you will know different. It's not enough. If you practice automatically without paying attention, it won't work. So what have you got? How do I practice paying attention, you might ask? Well, meditation, believe it or not, is one of the best ways of practicing focusing your attention, because that's what it's about. Focus your attention. When you get distracted, focus it again. When you get distracted, focus it again. And that's pretty hard work in itself. What else can you do? Well, you have goal setting. Articulating goals, whether they're long, medium, or short term, is very good for helping to focus your attention. And what's more, achieving a goal, having that little tick, gives you a boost of feel-good chemicals, like a win does. And that helps increase your motivation as well. And another thing that helps you develop your attention and your motivation is being in flow. And that means actively looking for stretch activities, things that are beyond your current capabilities, but not outside your potential, pushing yourself and trying and failing. How many people have seen this? Well, I'm not letting any cats out of the bag then. This is simply, for me, the best example of one of the downsides of paying attention. The bonus of paying attention is if you pay attention to something, you actively take attention away from other stuff, like emails or a pneumatic drill outside your window. You literally don't see or hear that, because that's not where your attention is. How many of you saw the gorilla? That's very good. I didn't. I'm one of the 52% of the people who would have gone to court and sworn on whatever that there was no gorilla. And just think about that in terms of how you behave at work. How often do you simply not hear or see someone, and what message that sends? I've been working with some really exceptional people, some great leaders, and what I've noticed throughout my career is they have two characteristics. One is they are absolutely laser-like in focusing their attention. The other is they switch that attention when they have to. Because the downside, the double-edged sword of attention, is missing stuff when you're paying attention elsewhere. And that is due, being able to switch your attention at will is also a skill you can practice. And you practice it by becoming expert enough to spot signals, like an oil price that's going down when it shouldn't, by knowing how to balance your gut instinct with your brain, by being open, genuinely open, starvingly open for ideas and thoughts and attitudes from other people. And that's what I found in truly great leaders, that openness, that willingness to pay attention to something that isn't theirs, to something that challenges them. It's just absolutely amazing. And it too is a skill that you can practice. So, I'm going to give you some advice, because what I've done is I've actually given you something that's very, very hard to do. Paying attention is tough. Practicing is tough. You know, not everyone can do it. Not everyone wants to do it. Not everyone wants to achieve greatness or expertise or even a skill or even get rid of a bad habit. But I've also taken away quite a few excuses. So my advice is, start by finding your passion, because that's going to make the rest easy or easier. Practice paying attention. And practice, practice, practice. Thank you very much.